Police body cams are meant to protect both officers and the public, capturing real-time footage of situations as they unfold. But sometimes, these cameras record moments that are far more disturbing than anyone could have expected. From routine calls that spiral into deadly confrontations to shocking incidents that happen in a matter of seconds, these recordings reveal just how unpredictable and dangerous real-life emergencies can be. Now, we'll look at 5 terrifying deaths caught on police body cam. Moments that are raw, intense, and impossible to forget.
Stop right there! Stop! Stop! Get on the ground, both of you! Lay down on the ground!
In January 2016, what should have been a routine police call in Mesa, Arizona, turned into one of the most haunting body cam incidents ever captured. Officers were responding to a report that a man had pointed a rifle out of a hotel window. Inside that hotel was 26-year-old Daniel Shaver, a pest control worker from Texas, in town on a business trip. He had been drinking in his room with 2 acquaintances, showing them a pellet gun he used for work to remove birds from grocery store ceilings. At some point, the gun was seen near the window, and someone called the police, believing it to be a real firearm. Within minutes, the hallway outside his room filled with armed officers, their rifles raised, treating the situation as a potential active threat. When Shaver and the woman with him finally stepped into the corridor, the atmosphere was tense, almost suffocating. Rifles were pointed directly at them, and the hallway echoed with sharp, urgent commands. The woman was taken into custody without harm, but Shaver was left alone in the corridor surrounded by guns and flashing lights, with multiple officers aiming at him from just a few feet away. What followed was a series of rapid, complicated instructions. Cross your legs, don't move, keep your hands up, crawl toward us. The commands came one after another, sometimes changing mid-motion, leaving little room for error. Shaver, clearly terrified and possibly intoxicated, struggled to keep up. His voice trembled as he pleaded, "Please don't shoot me." He was crying, crawling on the carpet, trying desperately to follow every order exactly as he heard it. Then, in a split second, everything went wrong. As he crawled forward, Shaver's hand drifted toward his waistband, possibly just trying to keep his shorts from slipping as he moved. In that moment, one of the officers believed he was reaching for a weapon and opened fire with an AR-15 rifle. The shots echoed down the narrow hallway. Shaver was struck multiple times and died almost instantly. When officers later searched the room, the only weapon they found was the pellet gun that had triggered the call in the first place. The body cam footage was not immediately released, and for months, Shaver's family pushed for it to be made public. When the video finally surfaced, it shocked viewers around the world. Many were disturbed by the confusing commands, the fear in Shaver's voice, and how quickly the situation escalated into deadly force. The officer who fired the shots was charged with second-degree murder and manslaughter, but after a lengthy trial, a jury found him not guilty. He was later briefly rehired by the department, which allowed him to qualify for a medical retirement and a monthly pension. Civil lawsuits followed, and years later, the city agreed to multi-million-dollar settlements with Shaver's family. Despite the legal outcomes, the footage continues to circulate online, often cited in debates about police training, use of force, and body cam transparency. To this day, the case remains one of the most controversial police body cam shootings ever recorded, an incident that left many people asking the same haunting question. How did a routine call end with a young man begging for his life on a hotel floor?
Responding to a call, gets out of his car and seconds later fatally shoots the 16-year-old girl.
In April 2021, a frantic 911 call brought police racing to a home in southeast Columbus, Ohio. The caller said there were girls outside trying to fight, maybe even stab someone. It sounded like chaos, but no one knew just how fast things were about to spiral out of control. When officers pulled up, the situation was already boiling over in the driveway. Several people were shouting, pushing, and circling each other. There was no time to slow things down, no time to ask questions. 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant suddenly appeared in the middle of the chaos, a knife in her hand. Within seconds, the scene turned from a heated argument into a life-or-death confrontation. Bodycam footage shows the officer stepping out of his cruiser, barely able to process what he's seeing. People are moving in different directions. Someone falls, another person shouts, and then, in one rapid motion, Bryant charges toward another girl and pins her against a car, raising the knife. The officer yells for her to get down, his voice sharp and urgent. But the distance between them is only a few steps, and the blade is already in motion. In that split second, with another life hanging in the balance, he fires 4 shots. The sound echoes through the neighborhood. Bryant collapses onto the pavement, motionless. Officers rush to her side almost immediately, trying to give first aid as the reality of what just happened settles in. Paramedics arrive, and she's taken to the hospital in critical condition. A short time later, she's pronounced dead. She was only 16 years old. When the Bodycam footage was released, it spread across the internet within hours. Some viewers said the officer's actions likely prevented another stabbing, arguing that he had only seconds to react. Others were outraged that a teenager lost her life in such a violent, public way, calling it another example of excessive force. Protests broke out in Columbus and other cities, and the case quickly became part of a larger national debate about policing, race, and the use of deadly force. An investigation followed, and the case eventually went before a grand jury. After reviewing the footage and evidence, the grand jury declined to charge the officer, ruling that the shooting was legally justified because it stopped an imminent threat. But for many people watching the video, the legal outcome didn't erase the emotional impact. The footage shows a confrontation that lasted only seconds, yet ended a young life forever, leaving behind a question that still divides opinions to this day. Was it a necessary act to save another, or a tragedy that should have ended differently?
Phoenix police released body camera of the 2 officers were responding to a 911 call when Ryan Whitaker opened the door with a gun in his hand.
In May 2020, a late-night knock at an apartment door in Phoenix, Arizona, turned into a fatal encounter that lasted only a few seconds. Police had been called to the complex after a neighbor complained about loud noises and possible domestic violence coming from inside one of the units. It sounded serious enough to send officers to the scene, but what was actually happening inside the apartment was far less dramatic. Ryan Whitaker, a 40-year-old man, was at home with his girlfriend, the two of them playing video games and talking loudly, unaware that their evening had already triggered a chain of events that would end in tragedy. The neighbor had called 911 twice that night, growing increasingly frustrated with the noise. In the second call, the complaint was escalated to suggest a possible violent fight, which pushed the dispatch status to a higher emergency level. By the time officers were sent out, they believed they might be responding to a domestic disturbance rather than a simple noise complaint. When officers arrived around 10:52 p.m., they positioned themselves on either side of Whitaker's front door, out of view of the peephole. From inside, there was no clear sign that police were standing there. When the knock came, Whitaker approached the door with a handgun at his side. His girlfriend later said there had been suspicious knocks earlier that week, so he carried the weapon as a precaution. Music was playing inside, and it's possible he never clearly heard the officers announce themselves. He opened the door expecting the unknown, not realizing armed officers were waiting just outside. The moment the door swung open, everything accelerated. A flashlight shined directly into his eyes. One of the officers suddenly shouted, "Hands! Hands! Hands!" Whitaker appeared startled, his voice rising in panic as he said, "Whoa! Whoa! Whoa!" realizing it was the police. Almost instantly, he began lowering the gun toward the floor and dropping to his knees, raising his other hand in surrender. The weapon slipped from his grip as he tried to comply. But before he could fully finish the motion, shots rang out. In the span of just a few seconds, the officer fired, striking Whitaker twice in the back. He collapsed to the floor. When his hand came back into view, it was empty. The gun lay behind him inside the apartment, out of reach. The entire encounter, from the door opening to the gunfire, had lasted roughly 5 seconds. Moments later, Whitaker's girlfriend rushed out, confused and horrified, asking why he had been shot. The officer replied that Whitaker had pulled a gun on them. In the body cam footage, another officer later remarked that he likely would have done the same thing if his partner hadn't fired first. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that there were no obvious signs of a violent fight inside the apartment, and some officers at the scene even suggested the neighbor may have exaggerated the call to speed up the response. Still, the emergency classification had already set the tone for the officer's approach. When the body cam video was finally released more than a month later, it spread quickly online. Many viewers were disturbed by how fast the situation escalated and how Whitaker appeared to be surrendering when he was shot. Protests followed, and his family demanded criminal charges against the officer, along with disciplinary action for others involved in the response. In the end, prosecutors declined to file criminal charges. The officer was initially set to be fired, but the termination was later reduced to a suspension. The city ultimately approved a $3 million settlement with Whitaker's family, and additional legal settlements followed in later years. For many who watched the footage, the most unsettling part wasn't just the outcome, it was the speed. One knock, one door opening, a few shouted words, and in less than 5 seconds a man was dead inside his own home, leaving behind a question that still lingers. How did a simple noise complaint turn into a fatal police shooting?
Patrick, you already know about your warrant, right?
Outrage tonight in Salt Lake City, where police body cam videos show police officers shooting a 50-year-old black man, one with live bullets, another with a stun gun, as he runs away.
In August 2017, what began as a minor bicycle stop in Salt Lake City, Utah, ended in a fatal shooting that would spark outrage and protests across the city. It was the kind of encounter most people wouldn't think twice about. A police officer pulling someone over for riding at night without proper lighting. But within minutes, the situation spiraled into a chase, a burst of gunfire, and a life cut short. Patrick Harmon, a 50-year-old man, was stopped by an officer who noticed he was riding his bicycle across multiple lanes of traffic without a red rear light. What seemed like a simple citation quickly became more serious when officers discovered Harmon had an outstanding warrant. As they attempted to arrest him, Harmon appeared emotional and distressed, telling officers he was trying to deal with the warrant. Then, instead of complying, he suddenly took off running. Bodycam footage captured the officers chasing him down the street. The sound of footsteps, heavy breathing, and shouted commands filled the recording. According to police, Harmon threatened them during the pursuit, allegedly saying he would cut them while holding a knife. Investigators later reported that a knife was recovered at the scene, but the video told a story that many viewers interpreted differently. As the chase continued, one officer could be heard shouting from a distance. Then, without warning, 3 shots rang out. Harmon was struck from behind as he ran away. He collapsed face down on the pavement, groaning in pain while officers moved in and handcuffed him. A taser was also deployed during the encounter, adding to the confusion and chaos of the moment. He was rushed to the hospital, but he did not survive. When the body cam footage was eventually released, it ignited intense public debate. Some officials and prosecutors said the shooting was justified, arguing that the officers believed their lives were in danger. The district attorney later ruled that the use of deadly force was justified under Utah law. Others, including members of Harmon's family and civil rights activists, said the video showed a man trying to flee, not attack. To them, it looked less like self-defense and more like an unnecessary use of deadly force. Protests erupted across Salt Lake City, with demonstrators demanding accountability and questioning how a stop for something as minor as a missing bike light could end in a fatal shooting. The case drew national attention, especially amid broader conversations about police conduct and racial disparities. Because of the public pressure and the seriousness of the case, the district attorney even requested a federal review by the FBI to ensure the investigation was fully examined. In the end, no criminal charges were filed against the officers. Still, the footage left a lasting impact. For many who watched it, the most troubling part was how quickly everything escalated, from a routine bicycle stop to a man lying motionless on the pavement. It's a moment that continues to raise difficult questions about split-second decisions, the use of force, and how encounters that start over the smallest violations can end in tragedy. In the early hours of March 23, 2020, A desperate phone call for help turned into one of the most disturbing body cam incidents of the year. Daniel Prude, a 41-year-old man visiting his brother in Rochester, New York, was in the middle of a severe mental health crisis. He had been acting erratically, reportedly after using PCP, and had already been taken to a hospital for evaluation earlier that night. But only hours later, he ran out of his brother's home and into the cold, dark streets, confused, frightened, and completely naked. His brother, terrified for his safety, called the police, hoping they would bring him back alive. When officers arrived around 3:16 a.m., their body cams captured a surreal and unsettling scene. Prude was standing alone in the street, unarmed, naked, and clearly not in his right state of mind. An officer approached him with a taser drawn, repeatedly ordering him to get on the ground. Prude complied without resistance, lowering himself onto the cold pavement and placing his hands behind his back. Even as he was handcuffed, he spoke softly, saying, "Yes, sir," and murmuring prayers under his breath. It was the kind of moment that seemed tense but manageable, until everything began to unravel. Minutes later, Prude grew agitated. He started shouting, spitting, and asking for a gun. Officers responded by placing a spit hood over his head. Through the mesh, he begged them to remove it, his voice rising in panic. Then he tried to stand up. Within seconds, several officers forced him face down onto the street. One officer pressed down on his head with both hands. Another pushed a knee into his back. A third held his legs. The body cam audio captured Prude's voice, strained and desperate, repeating a chilling phrase, "You're trying to kill me." The restraint lasted more than 2 minutes. At first, he moved and spoke. Then his voice faded. His body went still. Officers continued to hold him down even as liquid came from his mouth. For several moments, they talked among themselves, seemingly unaware that his breathing had slowed or stopped entirely. Then, someone noticed. His chest wasn't moving. He was unresponsive. Paramedics rushed in and began CPR right there on the pavement. The body cams captured the urgency, the sudden shift from control to panic. Within minutes, Prude was loaded into an ambulance. His heart briefly started again, but the damage had already been done. He had suffered severe oxygen deprivation. A week later, on March 30th, he was taken off life support. He never regained consciousness. The medical examiner ruled his death a homicide, caused by complications of asphyxia during physical restraint, with a drug intoxication listed as a contributing factor. But for months, the public knew nothing about what had happened. The body cam footage stayed hidden while the country erupted in protests after the death of George Floyd. It wasn't until September that the video and reports were finally released to the public. When people saw the footage, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Protests filled the streets of Rochester night after night. Some demonstrators sat naked outside City Hall, hands behind their backs, wearing spit hoods to recreate Prude's final moments. Others marched, shouted, and demanded accountability. The images were haunting, and the questions were impossible to ignore. How did a call for help end in death? Why did a man who complied with officers end up face down on the pavement, struggling for air? Political leaders called the video disturbing. Community members called it murder. The police chief and several top officials eventually stepped down as the pressure mounted. Yet, when the case went before a grand jury in 2021, no criminal charges were filed against the 7 officers involved. For many people, the outcome only deepened the anger and the grief. What remained was the footage itself, a chilling, real-time record of a man in crisis, whispering prayers on a cold street, and the slow, tragic moments that followed. It's a case that still lingers in the public memory, a stark reminder of how a call for help can turn into something far more devastating than anyone ever expected.